Hello and welcome back to Sage and Stone Homestead. My name is Heather and today I'm going to show you exactly what to do with this rabbit that you raised and butchered yourself. So this rabbit in this condition can be quite intimidating to figure out exactly how to cut up and exactly what to do with. So originally I had planned to shoot a video for you guys about how we can up our rabbit. Turns out we're coming into some weather here in the next day or so and we lose power really frequently. So not only can I probably not turn on my canner, but I probably can't edit a longer video like that. And really I think I'd like to do a canning 101 video really soon. So I think I'm going to turn it into something like that. But a lot of people who really aren't comfortable with canning are just as well or do just as well to freeze the rabbit. It's a very common method of preserving rabbit, and so I'm going to show you not only how to cut up rabbit but a good way to freeze it as well. A couple good ways to freeze it. So I have these bags from the Texas Poultry Shrink Bag Company. I'm going to list them in the description box below. I don't know what size bags these are. I assume they're nothing huge. They're turkey bags or anything. Bag that you would buy for a broiler chicken works just fine. And what you're going to do if you use these shrink bags is take your rabbit and notice that each leg has a pretty sharp end to it, and sharp bones plus plastic bags usually equals holes. So there's a special way that you want to pack up your rabbit when you're going to shrink wrap it. So our rabbit here has a really open rib cage, which is going to work great as a pocket for the back legs. So what I'm going to do is just lay the rabbit on its back, take these back legs here and tuck them inside this rib pocket, and that's going to protect those back legs and not allow them to pierce your bag. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to slide the rabbit in the bag so it nestles in perfectly with the shape of the bag. The bottom of the bag is curved. So you can put the rabbit in the bottom of the bag here, and then the process, I've got a video on the process, I'll link it at the end of this video, but basically we'll stick a straw in here, loosely put a zip tie around here, dunk it in, I think it's 165 to 190 degree water until it shrinks up. But as you can see here, the legs of the rabbit nestle in quite nicely where all of this plastic is gathered, and we've never had one puncture. So this is a really great option if you want to freeze whole rabbit. But I'm actually cooking with this rabbit tonight. So I am going to take this bunny out of this bag and we are going to cut up the bunny in its usable pieces. So as you can tell, this rabbit is quite limber. It's been sitting in the refrigerator for 2 days since processing, and that's allowed all of the rigor mortis to come out of the rabbit. I'd say that's a pretty important step and a pretty important thing to make sure happens, because rabbit can be a little bit tricky as far as getting the texture down when you're cooking it, and starting out with a tender product is going to help you achieve a tender result at the end as well. If you cook a rabbit or even a chicken on the same day that you process it, you do run the risk of it just being tougher because of that rigor mortis factor. So we're actually going to start with the front legs. So we've got the rabbit here on its back, and it's got these muscles here on like the brisket portion of the rib cage. We're going to be cutting the rabbit's front leg off with as much meat from the rib cage as possible. So I like to use this muscle here and pinch it to give myself a little bit of an anchor point, and I'm going to take my knife and I'm going to glide it along the side of the rib cage here, taking off meat with it. The great thing about this particular part of the rabbit is that it's basically a free moving arm here. There is no joint. This scapula just moves along the rib cage, and so there's really no other bone to get in your way or to try to get through here. So I'm going to pinch this little brisket part here and cut along the rib cage. Move it to the side. Okay, we've got one front leg right there. Sometimes it's helpful to flip the rabbit over and repeat on the other side. Watch your fingers. There we go. It's the other leg. Any extra bits of fat or muscling that I'm not going to cook with because maybe it has a little bit too much blood on it or whatever, I'm gonna stick it inside the rib cage and we'll deal with that later. So next we're gonna take off these meaty back legs here. And these do have a ball and socket joint at the hip that we will deal with. But the first thing we wanna do is actually expose that joint so we can work with it properly. And it's pretty easy to tell on the back side of the rabbit where these muscle groups attach. And we're just gonna be tracing along the back edge here with our knife. And we will be coming into contact with the hip bone back here. I'm just tracing that muscle group. We're gonna do one leg at a time. And coming from this direction, I'm gonna go down along the hip bone here. The hip bone is right there, if you can see it. I'm gonna follow that hip bone until I get to the ball and socket joint, like so. My joint's right there. Flip the rabbit over, do the same thing, but from this side. Follow along that hip bone. This one is a little bit trickier on the inside here. There it is. Okay, along the hip bone, we're to that joint there. And we've got one more side. On the inside here, we're going to cut down on the inside of the hip until we get to that joint. So we've pretty much freed up the leg. We just have this joint to deal with. And at this point, it's pretty simple. You're gonna place your hand behind the leg here, your thumb on top, brace the rabbit, and pull backwards. And the whole thing comes right off. So we'll repeat that with the other side so you can see that again. Come in, follow the hip bone down into the joint. Flip it over. This side is a little bit more tricky. And put the rabbit on its back, and we're going to go alongside the hip here until we get to that joint. Place our hand under the rabbit, thumb on top, brace the rabbit, and push up with your hand. There might be a little bit of connection left. You can just cut that right off. See? And the other leg is done. There's two more parts that we're going to deal with at this point. We have what's called the belly flaps and then this back strap here. So I'm gonna work with the belly flap first. I'm just gonna hold it up away from the rabbit and cut along the rib cage and cut along this back strap muscle here. So starting at the top, there we go. Cut along the ribs. And then once I get down to this back strap portion, I don't really want to cut into that. If I do, it's no big deal, but I'm just gonna cut alongside it like so, all the way down. So this is one belly flap piece. And there's the other belly flap. Okay, now we've got our back strap portion. We're gonna cut this away. I'm gonna start up here at the rib section, and I'm actually gonna follow this last rib at its angle all the way until we get to the backbone. I'm gonna do that on both sides. So you're gonna feel where the rabbit's last rib is. Come in at the same angle as the rib, up until you've hit the backbone. And I like to curve my knife across the back just to give myself a little bit of a guide. So again, we're gonna find that last rib here, cut underneath of it, same angle as the rib, and cut into the back like this. And now what we're going to do is actually flip the rabbit over, grab the rib cage with one hand, the back strap with the other, and actually use our thumb right at this point here where we cut, kind of as a leverage point, and pull backwards. So the rabbit comes apart just like that. Boop. And the rib cage is off. Okay, very similar process with this hip joint here, this hip bone. So we're gonna follow along a lot like we did with the rib, just with this hip bone until we get to the backbone. Previously, to cut the leg off, we cut on the outside of this hip bone. Now we're aiming to cut on the inside of the hip bone. Oop. There we go. Inside of the hip bone, all the way to the backbone, cut across. This hip bone, cut underneath of it at the same angle as the hip to the backbone. Can you see how we've freed the hip up there? So we're gonna turn, this would have been the inside of the rabbit, grab the hip with one hand, the back strap with the other, push together, and it all comes apart. You can rip it if you want or cut it. See, beautiful rabbit back strap right there. This extra piece, this hip bone, is gonna go straight inside our rib cage. So I have actually seen a lot of cookbooks that like to cut this piece in half. We don't. This is actually the piece that my husband eats, and I don't need to cut it up usually, but if you'd like to, I'm going to show you how to do that as well. So what we're going to aim to do is actually cut this back portion in half, and we're going to be keeping all the bones and things inside, but we're just going to be making it into two separate portions. So I'm going to be scoring the top of the meat right where I would like the separation to be, realizing that the backbone is right there and I'm not going to be able to go super deeply. It's just giving me kind of a guide. And on the side here, we're going to be cutting through this muscle all the way down to the backbone there. Flip it around, do the same thing on the other side, and then connect the two cuts underneath just down to where you can feel the backbone. And again, this would have been the inside of the rabbit. We're going to put our hands on either side and bend upward. We've got some spinal cord here. You can remove that or not, cut it away, totally fine. And then we have our two back strap portions if you wanted to make it into two separate cuts. So one of my friends who raises rabbits, this is exactly what she does before she even freezes the rabbit. We sit here together after we butchered her rabbits and after they've rested for a couple days, and we just have a party cutting up the rabbit into its pieces. And she finds, and I believe this is true, that freezing the rabbit this way, it takes a lot of work off of the front end when you go to cook rabbit, but also it fits into the freezer better because you're not dealing kind of with the dead air space that would be inside this rib cage. So if freezer space is at a premium for you, you might consider cutting your rabbit up before you put it away. So for long-term storage in the freezer, what I would do is put these in portion-sized bags, depending on how much your family likes to eat. We go through one rabbit at each meal, but we could go through more. So I may start packing up rabbit and a half portions, put it in a freezer bag, double bag it if you're going to be keeping it in the freezer for longer than 6 months. Or you can put that freezer bag inside some butcher paper. It's one of my favorite ways to freeze our meat is to use butcher paper. And I don't know, to me the jury's still out on how long any meat lasts in the freezer. I think it kind of depends on your freezer, on the conditions, on the way that you packaged it. But we have eaten meat that was well over 2 years frozen, and it was just as good as the day that it was butchered. So kind of use your own discretion on that. Oh yeah, and I didn't even tell you what we're going to do with this because we are not going to throw it away. What we're gonna do here is actually put our little refuse parcel here inside a freezer bag, and it's going to go in my freezer. I'm going to collect a whole bunch of these, and when I have enough to fill up my canner over there, I'm actually going to be making a whole huge batch of bone broth, and that is going to be on the channel relatively soon, so stay tuned for that. I'm actually going to be cooking this rabbit tonight. It's a recipe that I've made many times in the past, and it's one of our favorites. I did video me cooking this recipe probably around a year and a half ago, and I'm gonna link that video right here. As I mentioned before, preserving rabbit in cans with the pressure canner is one of my favorite ways to preserve rabbit, and I will be getting to that video really soon, so stick around for that too.